No. No. Hear me out. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, okay, Patrick Star, bottom of the list. Done deal. We all move on with our lives. And yeah, sure, on the surface, that tracks. But I need you to sit with something for a second before we start this thing. Because I think the way SpongeBob SquarePants handles intelligence, the way it actually builds these characters around what they know and what they don't know and what they choose not to know, is way more complicated than any ranking list has any right to be. This show has a literal supercomputer married to a microorganism with a college education. It has a sea sponge who can ace every written exam ever put in front of him, but cannot, for the life of him, drive a boat in a straight line. It has a snail who secretly reads classical literature in his dreams. And it has a squirrel from Texas who is, without question, one of the most accomplished scientists in the entire ocean. And somehow she's still hanging out with the fry cook and the guy who lives under a rock. So tonight, we're doing something a little different. We're ranking every major SpongeBob SquarePants character by intelligence, from the absolute bottom to the very top. And I don't just mean book smarts, because if that were all it was, this would be a 3-minute video and we'd all go to bed. I'm talking about every kind of intelligence this show actually depicts. Street smarts, emotional intelligence, survival instincts, creative problem solving, business acumen, technical genius. Whatever it is that allows Mr. Krabs to run the most successful restaurant in Bikini Bottom while paying his employees essentially nothing. We're covering all of it. And I should warn you, some of these rankings are going to be controversial. Some of them might even make you a little angry. That's fine. That's the whole point. Because once you start actually breaking down what each of these characters knows, what they're capable of, and where the show deliberately chooses to make them brilliant or oblivious, you start seeing SpongeBob SquarePants in a completely different way. You start seeing a show that understands intelligence isn't one thing. It's a spectrum. And every character in Bikini Bottom sits on a different part of it for very specific, very deliberate reasons. So if you're watching this late at night, get comfortable. Seriously, get the blanket, get the pillow situation sorted, maybe get some water, because we're going to be here for a long time. And if you haven't subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these for you. Just hit the button. Takes half a second. All right, let's get into it. I want to start where most people would expect me to start, and then I want to immediately mess with those expectations. Because the obvious move is to put Patrick Star right at the bottom, stamp a big number 1 on him, lowest intelligence in Bikini Bottom, and move on. And look, I get it. Patrick lives under a rock. Literally. His house is a rock. The guy once forgot his own name in the middle of a conversation. In the Season 2 episode, Survival of the Idiots, which aired on March 5th, 2001, he and SpongeBob get trapped inside Sandy's tree dome during winter and proceed to do the single dumbest series of things 2 characters have ever done in the history of animated television. They put on fur, they wrestle in the snow, they scream at a hibernating squirrel, and they nearly freeze to death because neither of them thought to just leave. And this is the same character who, in I Had an Accident, which aired on October 4th, 2003 as part of Season 3, genuinely could not figure out why SpongeBob didn't want to go outside anymore, even after SpongeBob explicitly explained it to him multiple times. So yeah, Patrick is not traditionally smart. The show makes that very, very clear. His character is built from the ground up to be the lovable idiot. Bill Fagerbakke, who has been voicing Patrick since the show premiered on May 1st, 1999, has talked about how he approaches the character with this kind of genuine innocence. Patrick doesn't know he's dumb. He doesn't experience his own lack of intelligence as a limitation. He just exists, happily, in a state of perpetual confusion, and the show finds endless comedy in the gap between what Patrick thinks is happening and what's actually happening. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's where I think most people get Patrick wrong. There's an episode from Season 4 called Patrick's Smart Pants, which aired in 2005, and the premise is beautifully simple. Patrick falls off a cliff while jellyfishing and his head pops off. SpongeBob, trying to help, finds a piece of brain coral nearby and sticks it on top of Patrick's body instead of his real head. And just like that, Patrick becomes a genius. He starts reading. He starts appreciating art and science and classical music. He corrects SpongeBob's grammar. He has actual, substantive thoughts about the world around him. And here's the part that gets me. He stops being able to enjoy the things he used to love. His friendship with SpongeBob starts falling apart because the things they bonded over, jellyfishing, blowing bubbles, all those simple pleasures, suddenly feel beneath him. He can't connect with his best friend anymore because he's too smart. And the resolution of that episode is Patrick choosing, deliberately, to go back to being himself. SpongeBob finds his real head, shows it to him, and Patrick says something that I think is actually kind of profound for a cartoon about a starfish. He says his intelligence isn't more important than his friendship, and he lets SpongeBob put his old head back on. He chooses friendship over brilliance. He chooses happiness over knowledge. Now, you can read that as a simple kids show moral. Be yourself. Love your friends. Don't change who you are. And that's fine. That works. But I think there's something deeper happening there. I think Steven Hillenburg, who created the show after spending years as a marine science educator at the Ocean Institute in Dana Point, California, before getting his Master of Fine Arts in Experimental Animation from CalArts in 1992, understood something about intelligence that most shows never bother to explore. He understood that being smart doesn't make you happy. That knowledge can isolate you just as easily as it can connect you. And that there's a kind of intelligence in choosing joy, even when the world around you seems to reward something else. So where does Patrick actually rank? Honestly, I'm putting him near the bottom, but not at the very bottom. And I need to explain why. Because there are moments, scattered throughout the entire run of this show, where Patrick demonstrates a kind of accidental wisdom that I don't think gets enough credit. In Naughty Nautical Neighbors, which aired on August 7th, 1999 in Season 1, Patrick performs CPR on Squidward and actually saves his life. No training, no instruction. He just does it. In Big Pink Loser, the Season 2 episode where Patrick tries to win an award, he manages to answer the phone at the Krusty Krab correctly exactly once. And the sheer force of his pride in that moment tells you something about how hard he's actually trying. And there are dozens of moments across the series where Patrick says something so accidentally profound that it stops the scene cold. He stumbles into insight the way most people stumble into walls. The fan community has actually built a whole theory around this. The idea that Patrick might be secretly intelligent, but choosing not to show it. And look, I don't think the show fully supports that reading. I think Patrick is genuinely, authentically, beautifully dumb. But I think the show is also saying that there's more than one way to understand the world. And Patrick's way, which is purely emotional, purely instinctual, purely in the moment, isn't nothing. It's just different. And you know what I keep thinking about? Chocolate with Nuts. Season 3, June 1st, 2002. SpongeBob and Patrick decide to become entrepreneurs, selling chocolate bars door to door. And the whole episode is this extended study of two very different kinds of dumb. SpongeBob is enthusiastic dumb. He believes every sale is going to work because he believes in the product. Patrick is chaotic dumb. He's the one who keeps making the situations worse in ways nobody could predict. But here's the twist. By the end of the episode, they actually succeed. Not through intelligence, not through strategy, through sheer, unstoppable persistence and a willingness to say literally anything to make a sale. They tell an elderly fish that chocolate makes you live forever, and she buys it. Not the chocolate, the lie. And the show frames their success not as a reward for cleverness, but as a reward for commitment. For caring enough to keep knocking on doors even after every single attempt has gone catastrophically wrong. There's a con artist in that episode who tricks them twice, once in a full body cast and once not. And the thing that always gets me is that SpongeBob and Patrick fall for it both times. They hand over their money because they believe the story. Because in their world, people don't lie. People don't trick you. People just need help. And if you can help them, you should. That's not intelligence. But it might be something better. And the show knows it. And I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think Patrick's intelligence, or lack thereof, is actually the show's most radical statement about how we define worth. Because Patrick contributes nothing to Bikini Bottom in any traditional sense. He doesn't work. He doesn't create. He doesn't solve problems. He lives under a rock, literally. And his primary activities are eating, sleeping, and spending time with SpongeBob. And the show never, not once, suggests that this makes him less valuable as a person. SpongeBob loves Patrick exactly as he is. The show loves Patrick exactly as he is.
And I think that's Hillenburg saying something pretty profound about a culture that tends to measure people by their productivity and their IQ. Alright, so Patrick's near the bottom. Who's actually at the very bottom? And this is where I'm going to lose some people, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think the character in SpongeBob SquarePants who consistently demonstrates the least functional intelligence is Larry the Lobster. Now hear me out. Larry's a great character. He's this big, muscular red lobster who hangs out at Goo Lagoon Beach and lifts weights and looks cool. He first appeared in the Season 1 episode Ripped Pants, which aired on July 17th, 1999, and his voice is provided by Mr. Lawrence in most of his speaking appearances. And people love Larry because he's basically the cool jock of Bikini Bottom. He's strong, he's confident, he's friendly. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. Larry is, intellectually, operating at a level that even Patrick would find concerning. And I know this is a controversial take. Most people don't even think about Larry when they think about SpongeBob character intelligence. He's a side character. He shows up at the beach, flexes, says something supportive, and disappears for 12 episodes. But I think that's exactly why he's a fascinating data point for this ranking. Because Larry represents the kind of intelligence that our culture rewards most visibly. Physical confidence, social ease, surface-level charisma. He walks into Goo Lagoon and everybody knows his name. He's popular, he's respected, he's admired. And none of that has anything to do with cognitive function. In the episode Pet or Pests, Larry sees SpongeBob's baby worms and thinks they're protein supplements. He tries to eat them, living baby creatures. He looks at them and his brain goes, food, that's it. There's no second thought, no moment of recognition, just muscle reflex and appetite. And in multiple episodes, including A Life in a Day from Season 6, Larry completely forgets who SpongeBob is. Not in a casual, oh hey, remind me of your name way. He genuinely does not remember this person he's interacted with dozens of times. His memory is essentially non-functional for anything that doesn't involve weights or surfing. But here's what saves Larry from being a completely flat character, and why I think the show is actually smart about how it uses him. Larry represents a very specific kind of intelligence that the show is simultaneously celebrating and gently mocking. He's physically brilliant. His body awareness, his athleticism, his understanding of how to move through space, all of that is off the charts. He threw a life ring so high and so fast, it caught up with a bolt shot from a giant crossbow. He tossed a big anchor 210 yards in a competition. His physical intelligence is extraordinary. It's just that everything above the neck is running on fumes. And I think there's a real argument to be made that in a different context, in a different show, Larry's kind of intelligence would be the one everyone celebrates. A professional athlete's body awareness, spatial reasoning, timing, and kinesthetic processing are all forms of intelligence that we recognize in the real world. We just don't call them that. We call them talent, or athleticism, or natural ability. But they're intelligence. They're the brain-solving incredibly complex problems in real time. Problems of physics and momentum and balance and coordination. Larry can do things with his body that Karen, for all her computational power, never could. And the fact that we instinctively rank cognitive intelligence above physical intelligence says more about our biases than it does about actual brain function. And honestly, I've rewatched a lot of Larry episodes putting this together, and I think the show uses him to make a point about how we value different kinds of smarts. Larry gets respect in Bikini Bottom. People look up to him, literally. But the moment the situation requires any kind of reasoning or memory or strategic thinking, he's completely lost. And the show never makes fun of him for it in a mean way. It just lets him be what he is. A very, very strong lobster who probably couldn't spell his own last name. Okay, moving up from there. And this is where the rankings start getting really interesting, because we're entering the territory of characters whose intelligence fluctuates wildly depending on the episode, the season, and frankly, which writer was in the room that day. I need to talk about Mermaid Man. Now, Mermaid Man is a tricky one because his intelligence isn't just low. It's complicated by age and dementia. And the show is actually doing something surprisingly nuanced with that. Mermaid Man, originally voiced by the legendary Ernest Borgnine from the show's debut in 1999, until Borgnine's death on July 8, 2012, at the age of 95, is a retired superhero living in the Shady Shoals rest home. He and his partner Barnacle Boy, voiced by Tim Conway, until Conway's passing on May 14, 2019, first appeared in the Season 1 episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, which premiered on August 21st, 1999. And here's the thing about Mermaid Man that I don't think people appreciate enough. In his prime, this character was clearly brilliant. He fought crime. He saved the ocean. He invented gadgets and defeated villains and understood complex situations. But by the time we meet him in SpongeBob, he's old. Really old. And the show, to its enormous credit, doesn't shy away from depicting the reality of cognitive decline. Mermaid Man forgets where he is. He yells evil at random moments. He confuses SpongeBob for other people. He wanders off in the middle of conversations. And the show plays it for comedy, yes, but there's always this undercurrent of something sadder, something more real. I think Steven Hillenburg and the early writers understood that Mermaid Man's decreased intelligence wasn't stupidity. It was loss. It was the erosion of a mind that used to be sharp. And I think that distinction matters for a ranking like this. You can't put Mermaid Man in the same category as Patrick or Larry because his low intelligence isn't his natural state. It's something that happened to him. And the show, in its best moments, treats that with a surprising amount of care for a Nickelodeon cartoon. Barnacle Boy, on the other hand, is clearly the more cognitively present of the two. He's irritable. He's aware of how ridiculous their situation is. And he consistently demonstrates better judgment and sharper thinking than his partner. The Barnacle Boy who snaps and joins the villains in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 5, which aired on June 1st, 2002 in Season 3, isn't acting out of stupidity. He's acting out of frustration. He's tired of being treated like a sidekick. He's tired of the kids' meals. And that kind of self-aware rebellion requires intelligence. It requires understanding your own situation well enough to be angry about it. Here's something else I find fascinating about those two. Their real names are nods to their voice actors. Mermaid Man's real name is Ernie, after Ernest Borgnine. Barnacle Boy's real name is Tim, after Tim Conway. After Borgnine passed away in 2012, Hillenburg made the decision not to recast Mermaid Man. And when Conway passed away in 2019, the production team honored that same principle for Barnacle Boy. That's the kind of respect for character and performance that tells you everything about what kind of show this was at its core. Those characters essentially retired when their actors did. That means something. Alright, I'm going to shift gears now, because we need to talk about the character who I think is the most misunderstood entry on any SpongeBob intelligence ranking, and that's SpongeBob himself. Here's the thing about SpongeBob's intelligence. It's a paradox, a genuine, intentional, brilliantly constructed paradox that I think is one of the most impressive pieces of character design in the history of animated television. And I mean that. SpongeBob SquarePants, voiced by Tom Kenny since that very first episode on May 1st, 1999, is simultaneously one of the smartest and one of the dumbest characters in Bikini Bottom. And the show is completely deliberate about that contradiction. Let me break it down. On the SpongeBob is smart side of the ledger, the evidence is overwhelming. In Boating School, which aired on August 7th, 1999, as part of Season 1, we learn that SpongeBob aces every written and oral exam Mrs. Puff gives him. Every single one. He answered most of her questions before she even finished asking them. He has failed the driving portion of the exam over 1 million times according to one count. But on paper, on any test of knowledge, recall, or reasoning, he's perfect. He's also a master chef, not just a competent fry cook, a master. He can prepare a Krabby Patty with his eyes closed. He can prepare dozens simultaneously. In the Krusty Krab training video from Season 3, which aired on May 10th, 2002, the entire episode is structured as an instructional video, and SpongeBob instinctively understands every aspect of the job without needing to be taught. He intuits the process, and then there's his creativity. In Frankendoodle, which aired on January 21st, 2002 in Season 2, SpongeBob picks up a magic pencil and immediately creates a living drawing. Not by accident. He has an artistic impulse, a creative intelligence, that lets him bring things to life. In Artist Unknown from Season 2, which aired on September 21st, 2001, Squidward tries to teach SpongeBob art and is immediately, almost painfully jealous of SpongeBob's natural talent. SpongeBob creates a masterpiece effortlessly. An art collector named Monty P. Moneybags shows up and falls in love with the work. SpongeBob's artistic intelligence is so pure, so instinctive, that it makes Squidward's studied, effortful approach look pathetic by comparison. And I want to slow down here for a second and really sit with how extraordinary SpongeBob's culinary intelligence is, because I think people dismiss it as a joke when it's actually one of the most consistent character traits in the entire show. SpongeBob doesn't just cook Krabby Patties. He is a Krabby Patty. Cooking is so central to his identity that separating him from it, as the show demonstrates in multiple episodes, literally breaks him. When he loses his job, he falls apart. When he can't cook, he loses himself. His intelligence in the kitchen isn't just skill, it's identity. It's his entire sense of self, compressed into the act of assembling a perfect burger. And the show never, not once, treats that as lesser than Sandy's scientific achievements or Plankton's technological inventions. Cooking is presented as a legitimate, valuable, meaningful form of intelligence. And in a culture that tends to devalue blue-collar skills, that feels radical. But here's the flip side. SpongeBob cannot drive a boat. He has failed Mrs. Puff's boating exam more than 1,000,000 times. He consistently fails to understand when he's being manipulated. He takes everything at face value. He trusts everyone, including people who have actively tried to harm him. In Season 1's Plankton, which aired on July 31st, 1999, and marked Plankton and Karen's first appearance on the show, Plankton literally crawls inside SpongeBob's brain to control him, and SpongeBob barely registers what's happening. He is, in the most fundamental sense, naive. Not stupid, naive. And I think that distinction is everything. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't a light video. So let me take a moment to dig into something I've been thinking about for a while, because I think it explains SpongeBob's intelligence better than anything else I've come across. I think SpongeBob represents what you might call selective intelligence. He's brilliant at the things he cares about, and essentially non-functional at the things he doesn't. He cares about cooking. He's a genius cook. He cares about his friends. His emotional intelligence, his ability to read people's feelings and respond with genuine empathy is extraordinary. He cares about jellyfish. He knows everything about them. He cares about his job. He's the single most dedicated employee in Bikini Bottom's history. But driving? He doesn't really need to drive. He walks to work. Understanding deception? He doesn't want to understand deception because that would require him to believe that people are dishonest. And SpongeBob's entire worldview is built on the assumption that everyone is good. His intelligence isn't low, it's specialized. And the show rewards that specialization constantly. SpongeBob saves the day not because he's the smartest person in the room, but because he cares the most. And caring, in the universe of this show, is its own kind of genius. Tom Kenny has talked about this in interviews. He's described SpongeBob as having this kind of emotional radar that's always on, always picking up signals that other characters miss. SpongeBob notices when Squidward is sad. He notices when Patrick is struggling. He notices when something is off, even when he can't articulate what it is. And that's intelligence. It's just not the kind that shows up on a test. And here's an episode that I think crystallizes SpongeBob's unique kind of intelligence better than any other. Rock Bottom, Season 1. Originally aired March 15th, 2000. SpongeBob and Patrick take the wrong bus home from Glove World and end up in Rock Bottom, this eerie deep-sea town where everything is dark and strange, and the inhabitants speak by blowing raspberries between their words. Patrick accidentally catches a bus back home, leaving SpongeBob stranded. And what follows is 11 minutes of SpongeBob trying to get home. He waits in line. He misses buses. He can't communicate with the locals because he doesn't know their language. He's lost. He's confused. He's out of his depth in every possible way. And by any traditional measure of intelligence, SpongeBob fails this test. He can't figure out the bus schedule. He can't adapt to the local dialect. He can't navigate an unfamiliar environment. But here's the thing. He survives. Not through intelligence. Through something else. Through resilience. Through optimism. Through an absolute refusal to give up even when everything around him is alien and frightening. SpongeBob doesn't solve Rock Bottom. He endures it. He keeps trying. He keeps being polite to people who can't understand him. He keeps showing up at the bus stop, even after missing bus after bus. And eventually, someone helps him. A friendly creature from Rock Bottom inflates a balloon and sends SpongeBob floating home. And I think that episode is the purest expression of what SpongeBob's intelligence actually is. It's not problem-solving intelligence. It's survival intelligence. It's the intelligence of persistence, of hope, of maintaining your identity and your kindness, even when the world around you makes no sense. SpongeBob doesn't outsmart rock bottom. He outlasts it. And in a world that rewards cleverness and strategy and analytical thinking, I think there's something radical about a show that says, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is keep showing up. I've rewatched Rock Bottom probably 8 times putting this video together, and it hits different every time. Because the older I get, the more I understand what it feels like to be in a place where you don't speak the language, where the rules don't make sense, where you can't seem to catch the right bus no matter how hard you try. And SpongeBob's response to that, which is to stay kind and stay hopeful and stay himself, feels less like stupidity and more like wisdom the more times I see it. So where does SpongeBob rank? I'm putting him squarely in the middle, above the characters who are genuinely unintelligent, but below the ones who can operate across all domains consistently. He's a savant. He's a specialist. He's the Michael Jordan of fry cooking and friendship, and the equivalent of a toddler at everything else. And I think that's exactly what Steven Hillenburg wanted. Okay, I need to talk about Mrs. Puff now, because she's a character whose intelligence is both higher and darker than most people realize. Mrs. Penelope Puff, voiced by Mary Jo Catlett, runs Mrs. Puff's boating school, and she has been dealing with SpongeBob since the school opened. She's his driving instructor, his only driving instructor. And the fact that she hasn't had a complete psychological breakdown, well, actually, she has, multiple times. But the fact that she keeps coming back tells you something about either her dedication or her desperation. Here's what most people don't think about with Mrs. Puff. She's a certified educator. She runs an entire school. She designs curricula. She administers exams. She understands pedagogy well enough to teach every other student in her class successfully. SpongeBob is her only student who has never passed the driving test. Everyone else graduates. Everyone else learns. Which means Mrs. Puff is actually a competent, intelligent teacher who happens to have one student who is literally impossible to teach. But it goes deeper than that. In No Free Rides from Season 2, which aired on April 14th, 2001, Mrs. Puff gives SpongeBob a passing grade through bogus extra credit just to get him out of her class. And when she realizes what she's done, when she sees SpongeBob actually driving on the open road with a license she knows he doesn't deserve, she goes to extraordinary lengths to steal his boat and undo her mistake. That's not the behavior of a dumb character. That's the behavior of someone who understands consequences. Someone who made a calculated decision, realized it was wrong, and tried to fix it through equally calculated means. And then there's the darker side. In Doing Time from Season 3, Mrs. Holmes, Puff goes to prison, and the reveal is that she actually prefers it there. She's happier in prison than she is teaching SpongeBob. And in No Free Rides, there's this incredible implication that Mrs. Puff has done this before. That she's had to move to a new town and start a new school with a new name, a whole new identity. That's not just intelligence. That's operational intelligence. That's the intelligence of someone who has built and destroyed multiple lives and learned how to start over each time. And here's what I find really compelling about Mrs. Puff's intelligence when you look at it closely. She's the only character in the main cast who is consistently aware of the absurdity of her situation. SpongeBob doesn't know his world is ridiculous. Patrick doesn't notice. Mr. Krabs doesn't care. But Mrs. Puff knows. She knows that her life has become a loop. That SpongeBob will fail the driving test. That she'll go to prison again. That the cycle will never end. And that awareness, that meta-intelligence about the structure of her own existence, is actually the most sophisticated kind of thinking any character in the show demonstrates. Think about it. Mrs. Puff doesn't just understand her environment. She understands the pattern. She can predict what's going to happen before it happens. She knows SpongeBob is going to crash. She knows she's going to inflate. She knows the consequences are coming, and she sits at her desk every morning and teaches the class anyway. That's not stupidity. That's something closer to acceptance. Something closer to a kind of existential intelligence that most characters in most shows never achieve. She sees the futility, and she keeps going. And if that sounds like something Camus might have written about, well, there's a reason the SpongeBob philosophy videos keep getting millions of views. Her criminal record, which is reportedly the largest of any character on the show, is also evidence of something the show rarely acknowledges directly. Mrs. Puff is resourceful. She's adaptable. She's capable of surviving in situations that would break most people. She's been to prison multiple times, and she keeps getting out. She's had to reinvent herself, create new identities, start new schools. Every single one of those things requires intelligence, planning, execution, follow through. The fact that we see her through the lens of comedy doesn't change the fact that Mrs. Puff is, functionally, one of the most capable survivors in Bikini Bottom. She's just surviving the wrong thing. She's surviving SpongeBob. And SpongeBob, as we've established, is a force of nature that intelligence alone cannot handle. I actually think Mrs. Puff might be one of the most quietly intelligent characters in the entire show, and it's tragic that her intelligence is mostly expressed through suffering. She's smart enough to know exactly how much danger SpongeBob represents. She's smart enough to game the system when she needs to. She's smart enough to build escape plans and cover stories and new identities. But she's trapped, permanently, in a situation where none of that intelligence can save her, because SpongeBob keeps coming back. Every semester. Every test. Every crash. I'm putting Mrs. Puff solidly in the upper middle tier. She's smarter than SpongeBob, smarter than Squidward in many practical ways, and definitely smarter than anyone gives her credit for. Her criminal record, which is the largest of any character on the show according to the SpongeBob wiki, isn't evidence of stupidity. It's evidence of a life lived at the very edge of sanity, driven there by forces completely beyond her control. Now, Squidward. Let's talk about Squidward tentacles. Squidward is the character that everyone thinks is smart, and in some ways he absolutely is. But in other ways, he's running a con on himself that the show systematically exposes across 25 years of episodes. And I think the way SpongeBob handles Squidward's intelligence is one of the most honest, most cutting things the show ever does. Roger Bumpass has been voicing Squidward since day one. He was actually the first cast member to be nominated for an Emmy Award, receiving a nomination in 2012 for the role. And what Bumpass brings to Squidward is this incredible blend of superiority and insecurity. This voice that's constantly performing intelligence, constantly insisting on its own sophistication, while the person behind it is falling apart. Here's what Squidward actually knows. He knows about art, legitimately. In Artist Unknown, his art class may be a disaster, but he understands composition, technique, and artistic movements well enough to teach them. In Suction Cup Symphony, from Season 6, which aired on March 29, 2008, he composes an entire symphony. He sits down, writes it, conducts it with a professional orchestra, and the audience loves it. The joke of the episode is that the sounds SpongeBob and Patrick made while annoying him accidentally became the music. But Squidward's ability to translate noise into composition is genuine. He understands music theory. He understands orchestration. He has real knowledge in that domain. He also has cultural knowledge. He knows about literature, wine, cuisine, architecture. He identifies as sophisticated, and in certain narrow areas, that identification is actually earned. He's well-read. He's been to places. He has opinions about things that require having actually thought about them. But here's where Squidward falls apart, and I think this is the key to understanding his intelligence. Squidward has almost zero self-awareness. He is smart enough to see the world clearly, but completely incapable of seeing himself. And I think this is something the show handles with remarkable sophistication for a cartoon. Because self-awareness, the ability to see yourself as others see you, to understand your own limitations, to recognize the gap between who you are and who you want to be, might be the most important kind of intelligence there is. And Squidward doesn't have it. At all. He thinks he's a great artist, but in Artist Unknown, SpongeBob's effortless masterpiece makes Squidward's work look mediocre. He thinks he's a great musician, but his clarinet playing is consistently described as terrible by everyone who hears it. He thinks he's better than SpongeBob and Patrick, but in Band Geeks, the Season 2 episode that aired on September 7th, 2001, the only reason his band succeeds is because of the very people he looks down on. And that's the thing about Squidward that I keep coming back to. He's smart enough to be unhappy, and not smart enough to understand why. He lives in a state of perpetual frustration because he can see what he wants. He can articulate what he wants. He can point to exactly the life he thinks he deserves. But he can't close the gap between who he is and who he wants to be. And I think that makes him one of the most realistic depictions of a certain kind of intelligence that you'll find anywhere in animation. The intelligence that understands failure,
without being able to prevent it. And there's another dimension to Squidward's intelligence that I want to explore, because I think it's one of the most interesting things the show does with any character. Squidward is, by far, the most culturally literate character in Bikini Bottom. He reads. He goes to concerts. He visits galleries. He appreciates wine and fine dining and architecture and ballet. He consumes culture voraciously, and in a show full of characters who live in an eternal present, who never reference anything outside of Bikini Bottom, Squidward is the only one who seems to be aware that a wider world exists. He knows about composers and artists and literary movements. He has context that nobody around him shares, and the show asks a devastating question about that cultural intelligence. Does it matter? Because Squidward's knowledge of Beethoven doesn't help him play the clarinet better. His appreciation of fine art doesn't make his own paintings any more successful. His understanding of what good food tastes like doesn't change the fact that he eats at the Krusty Krab. All of that cultural knowledge, all of those years of consuming and learning and developing taste, sits inside him like unused furniture. It's there. It's real. It's just not doing anything. And I think the show is making a very specific point about the difference between consuming intelligence and producing it. Squidward has consumed enormous amounts of culture and knowledge, but producing something of equal quality has remained beyond his reach. And that gap, the gap between what you can appreciate and what you can create, is one of the most human things SpongeBob SquarePants ever depicts. In Professor Squidward, a music school headmistress mistakes him for Squilliam Fancyson and offers him a teaching position at the Bikini Bottom prestigious music college. And Squidward takes it, posing as Squilliam, because the opportunity is too good to resist. And for a moment, he's in his element, teaching music at a prestigious institution, sharing his knowledge, being respected for what he knows. And then it falls apart, as it always does, because the identity isn't his. The success isn't earned. The intelligence is real, but the credentials are fake. And I think that episode is Squidward's tragedy in miniature. He has the knowledge to be what he wants to be. He just doesn't have the talent, the luck, or the self-awareness to close the gap. His rivalry with Squilliam Fancyson makes this even more painful. Squilliam, who first appeared in Band Geeks and returned in Squilliam Returns, which aired on March 15th, 2002 in Season 3, is everything Squidward wants to be. Wealthy, successful, respected, talented. Squilliam owns a private yacht, a private lake, a private island, a private heliport, and a balloon casino. He succeeded in everything Squidward failed in. And the show uses Squilliam to expose the specific nature of Squidward's intellectual limitation. It's not that Squidward isn't smart. It's that his intelligence is undermined by his ego, his insecurity, and his inability to focus that intelligence productively. Remember what I said about SpongeBob being selectively intelligent? Squidward is the dark mirror of that. SpongeBob is brilliant at the things he cares about. Squidward is mediocre at the things he thinks he should care about. SpongeBob's intelligence serves his happiness. Squidward's intelligence feeds his misery. And I think that's one of the most brilliant character dynamics in the history of animated television. I'm putting Squidward in the mid to upper tier. He's genuinely knowledgeable in multiple domains, which puts him above SpongeBob and Patrick. But his intelligence is so thoroughly sabotaged by his own psychology that it barely functions in practice. He's the smartest failure in Bikini Bottom, and the show loves him for it. And I want to linger on that for a moment, because I think the show's treatment of Squidward's intelligence is actually one of the most compassionate things it does. It would be easy to mock Squidward for his failures. It would be easy to frame him as a pretentious idiot who thinks he's better than he is. In some of the later seasons, the ones written after Hillenburg stepped back following the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, do lean into cruelty towards Squidward in ways I think are genuinely mean-spirited. But in the first 3 seasons, the golden era, the show understands Squidward's pain. It knows that his intelligence is real. It knows that his ambitions are genuine. And it acknowledges that sometimes being smart and having dreams and still failing anyway isn't funny. It's just sad. There's this moment in Dying for Pie, the Season 2 episode that aired in early 2001, where Squidward thinks SpongeBob has eaten an explosive pie and is going to die at sunset. And Squidward, this character who complains about SpongeBob constantly, who wishes SpongeBob would disappear, who rolls his eyes at everything SpongeBob does, decides to spend SpongeBob's last day making him happy. He watches the sunset with him. He does all the things SpongeBob loves. He's present, genuinely present, in a way he never normally allows himself to be.
And that's intelligence. Not book intelligence. Not cultural intelligence. Emotional intelligence. The intelligence to recognize what matters when the clock is running out. Squidward has it. He just buries it under 6,000 layers of sarcasm and resentment. But it's there. The show makes sure we see it. If you're watching this late at night, you know what I mean. You know what it feels like to have those layers. To be smart enough to know what you should care about. And too something. Too scared. Too proud. Too tired. To actually care about it. Squidward is the most relatable character in SpongeBob for a lot of adults. And I think his intelligence is the reason why. Not because we relate to his talent, because we relate to his inability to use it. Let me talk about SB129 for a second, because I think this episode from Season 1, which aired on December 31st, 1999, tells you everything about how the show views Squidward's relationship with intelligence. In this episode, Squidward accidentally gets frozen in the Krusty Krab freezer and wakes up 2,000 years in the future. Everything is chrome. There are 486 Spongetron clones. And Squidward gets access to a time machine and starts bouncing through history, visiting the prehistoric past and the far future, trying to find a time period where he can be alone. And here's the thing that always gets me. Squidward, in this episode, accidentally invents jellyfishing. He shows primitive sponge and prehistoric starfish how to do it, creating a time paradox that the show just casually drops on the audience in a Season 1 episode of a kid's cartoon. And Squidward's reaction when he realizes what he's done is perfect. He doesn't celebrate his accidental genius. He doesn't marvel at the implications of time travel. He just wants to go home. That's Squidward in a nutshell. He stumbles into moments of genuine brilliance and can't even recognize them because he's too busy being miserable. Alright, I need to shift to someone who most people completely overlook in these conversations, and that's Gary the Snail. Gary is SpongeBob's pet. He says meow. He leaves slime trails around the pineapple. On the surface, he's a simple domestic animal, the underwater equivalent of a house cat. And most people watching SpongeBob, especially casually, never think of Gary as anything other than a cute, funny pet character. But the show has been telling us for over 25 years that Gary is hiding something. The evidence starts early. In Sleepy Time from Season 1, which originally aired on January 17th, 2000, SpongeBob enters the dreams of his friends through astral projection. And when he enters Gary's dream, what he finds is genuinely shocking for a kid's cartoon. Gary is standing upright, in a humanoid form, inside a massive personal library. He can speak. Not just speak. He speaks eloquently. He discusses literature. He quotes philosophy. And when SpongeBob reacts with surprise, Gary's response is devastating. He says something along the lines of, "Did you think my shell was full of hot air?" Think about that for a second. In Gary's subconscious, in the place where his true self lives, he's an intellectual, a scholar, a reader, and his waking life, the meow meow pet existence, is either a performance or a prison. The show never explicitly tells us which one it is, but both readings are incredible, and it doesn't stop there. Throughout the series, Gary demonstrates abilities that no ordinary pet should have. He can read. This has been shown in multiple episodes, including Gary Takes a Bath from Season 2, Rockabye Bivalve from Season 3, and Library Cards from Season 11, which aired on September 25th, 2018, where Patrick discovers SpongeBob's library, and Gary is already deeply familiar with the books. In The Secret Box from Season 2, Gary responds to SpongeBob with what sounds like meow no, and SpongeBob dismisses it. Not because Gary didn't communicate, but because SpongeBob doesn't think a snail would have anything meaningful to say. Gary has spoken actual words. SpongeBob just doesn't listen. And in Chatterbox Gary, the show finally lets Gary exercise his full vocabulary, and what comes out is sophisticated, measured, and perceptive. He describes his owner and his peers with the kind of precision that suggests he's been observing everything, understanding everything, and choosing to stay quiet about it. And you know what really gets me about Gary? The relationship between him and SpongeBob. SpongeBob loves Gary unconditionally, takes care of him, feeds him, worries about him, and SpongeBob has no idea what's actually going on inside Gary's shell. He doesn't know about the library. He doesn't know about the eloquence. He doesn't know that his pet is potentially one of the most intelligent beings in Bikini Bottom. And Gary doesn't tell him. Gary just sits there, saying, meow, accepting SpongeBob's love, and keeping his own inner world completely private. There's something incredibly rich about that dynamic. The most emotionally intelligent character in the show, SpongeBob, lives with one of the most secretly intellectually intelligent characters, Gary, and neither of them fully understands the other. SpongeBob sees a pet who needs food and baths and belly rubs. Gary sees an owner who is kind and loving and gloriously, beautifully oblivious to the depth of what he's caring for. And they're both happy. They both have what they need from the relationship. And the show is saying, quietly, that you don't have to understand someone completely to love them completely. You don't have to know what's in someone's shell to know what's in their heart. I think about this every time I see a Gary scene now. The idea that intelligence can be private, that it can exist without needing to be seen or validated or measured, that you can be extraordinary and choose not to show it. Not because you're hiding, because it's yours, because it belongs to you and you alone. And sharing it would change its nature, would make it perform for someone else instead of existing for yourself. That might be the most intelligent thing any character in SpongeBob SquarePants ever does. Not inventing something, not solving something, not winning something, just existing, fully and privately and completely, inside the shell of your own mind. I'm putting Gary surprisingly high on this list. Above SpongeBob, above Squidward. I know that sounds wild, but the evidence is actually really strong once you start looking for it. Gary is a character whose intelligence is hidden by his form. He's trapped in the body of a snail, communicating in meows, living as a pet. But underneath all of that, there's a mind that the show consistently presents as sharp, cultured, and deeply aware. He's the ultimate sleeper pick, and I think that's exactly what the writers intended. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 a.m. The idea that Gary's dream self is who he really is. That the version of Gary who reads books and discusses philosophy and stands upright in a library is the real Gary, and the meowing snail is just what the world sees. There's something about that idea that hits me every single time. All right, now we're getting into the upper tiers, and this is where things get really fun. Because the top 4 or 5 characters, in terms of intelligence, are all legitimately brilliant, and the arguments about where they rank relative to each other are genuinely interesting. Let's start with Mr. Krabs. Eugene H. Krabs, voiced by Clancy Brown, is the founder and owner of the Krusty Krab, the most successful restaurant in Bikini Bottom. And the question of Mr. Krabs' intelligence is, I think, one of the most fascinating in the entire show, because it forces you to reckon with what intelligence actually means. Is Mr. Krabs smart? In terms of raw business acumen, the answer is an unambiguous yes. He built the Krusty Krab from nothing. He acquired the secret formula. He turned a single restaurant into the dominant food establishment in an entire city. He's launched multiple business ventures, including Krabby Mondays, the Krusty Sponge, the Pretty Patty's store, and the Krusty Towers Hotel. He keeps his operating costs at absolute rock bottom, pays his employees essentially nothing, and charges premium prices for his product. From a pure profit maximization standpoint, Mr. Krabs is a genius. He's the most successful business person in Bikini Bottom, and it's not even close. But here's the thing, and this is where Mr. Krabs gets interesting. His intelligence is almost entirely confined to money. Remove the financial incentive, and Mr. Krabs' cognitive abilities plummet. His understanding of people, of emotions, of relationships, of anything that can't be quantified in dollars is remarkably poor. He sold SpongeBob's soul for 62 cents. He has repeatedly put his employees in physical danger to save money. He treats his own daughter, Pearl, as an expense to be minimized rather than a person to be loved. In Friend or Foe, the Season 5 episode that aired on April 13th, 2007, we learn that Mr. Krabs and Plankton were childhood best friends. They were born on the same day. They did everything together. And their falling out happened over a burger recipe, a piece of paper. And Mr. Krabs chose the recipe, chose the money, chose the business over a lifelong friendship. That's not the decision of a dumb character. That's the decision of a character whose intelligence is so narrowly focused on acquisition that it can't process any other kind of value. I've actually been thinking about this a lot putting this video together, and I think Mr. Krabs represents something very specific about intelligence that the show is critiquing. He's smart in the way that a lot of very successful people in the real world are smart. He understands systems. He understands leverage. He He understands how to extract maximum value from every situation, but that understanding comes at the cost of everything else. His emotional intelligence is near zero. His ethical reasoning is non-existent. His ability to maintain meaningful relationships is catastrophically poor. And the show asks, repeatedly, whether that kind of intelligence, the kind that makes you rich but makes everyone around you miserable, actually counts as smart. I'm putting Mr. Krabs in the upper middle tier, below the true geniuses, but above the mid-range characters. His business intelligence is exceptional. It's just that it's the only kind he has, and the show makes sure you never forget the cost. And here's something else about Mr. Krabs that I think is really important for this ranking. His intelligence has a dark side that goes beyond greed. Mr. Krabs is a manipulator, a genuinely skilled manipulator. He knows exactly how to exploit SpongeBob's loyalty. He knows exactly how to play on Squidward's insecurity. He knows how to frame terrible decisions as reasonable business practices. In episode after episode, he convinces his employees to work longer hours for less money, to accept dangerous conditions, to give up their rights and their dignity, all while making them feel like they should be grateful for the opportunity. That's not just business acumen. That's psychological manipulation. And it requires a deep understanding of how people work. Mr. Krabs reads people better than almost anyone else in the show. He just uses that reading for extraction rather than connection. He understands SpongeBob's need to please. He understands Squidward's need for stability. He understands his customers' desire for cheap food, and he exploits every single one of those needs for profit. The thing is, there's actually a brilliant, devastating counterexample that shows what happens when Mr. Krabs' manipulative intelligence meets something it can't control, and that's his relationship with Pearl. Pearl is his daughter, and Mr. Krabs' intelligence, his business mind, his manipulative understanding of people completely fails when it comes to her. Because Pearl doesn't want money. Pearl wants a father. She wants attention, love, emotional presence. And those are currencies that Mr. Krabs doesn't know how to spend, because his intelligence has no framework for them. Every time Mr. Krabs tries to be a good father, he defaults to his only mode of intelligence, which is financial. And Pearl sees right through it. She doesn't want a cheaper birthday party to maximize savings. She wants her dad to care about what she cares about. And he can't do it, not because he doesn't love her, because his intelligence literally doesn't have the tools. I keep coming back to this point, and I know I keep coming back to it, but I think it's the key to everything. Intelligence in SpongeBob SquarePants is never just about capacity. It's about application. It's about what you build with the tools you have. And Mr. Krabs builds an empire and loses a family. That's not a failure of intelligence. It's a failure of wisdom, and the show knows the difference. Remember what I said earlier about SpongeBob's intelligence being selective? Mr. Krabs is the most extreme version of that idea. SpongeBob is selectively brilliant at the things he loves. Mr. Krabs is selectively brilliant at the thing he loves, which is money. And the difference between them is that SpongeBob's selective intelligence makes the world better, and Mr. Krabs' selective intelligence makes the world worse. Same cognitive pattern. Completely opposite outcomes. That's the kind of character writing that keeps me up at night. Alright, the top tier. The genuine geniuses of Bikini Bottom. The characters who operate at a level that would be impressive in any universe. Not just one populated by talking sea creatures. And we need to start with the character who I think is the most interesting intelligence in the entire show. The one whose brain I find the most fascinating to analyze, the most rewarding to discuss, and the most heartbreaking to watch. Sheldon J. Plankton. Plankton, voiced by Mr. Lawrence since the pilot episode, is one of the most complex depictions of intelligence in the history of animation, and I genuinely believe that. When Hillenburg was working on the show, he initially planned for Plankton to appear in only one episode, that debut in Plankton from Season 1, which aired on July 31st, 1999. But the character was so rich, so compelling, that he became one of the show's most important recurring players. And the thing about Plankton's intelligence is that it's simultaneously incredible and completely self-defeating. Let's start with what he can do. Plankton is a genuine scientific prodigy. He built Karen from a calculator and a mass of wires. Just sit with that for a second. He took a calculator, some wires, and he created a sentient artificial intelligence with a personality, emotions, opinions, and the ability to analyze virtually anything. Karen is, as far as we can tell, the most advanced piece of technology in Bikini Bottom, and Plankton built her essentially from scratch. That alone puts him in the upper echelon of intelligence in this universe. But it goes further. Plankton has built mind control devices. He created the chum bucket helmets that allowed him to control the minds of everyone in Bikini Bottom in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, which was released in 2004 and was intended by Steven Hillenburg to serve as the series finale. He's built giant robots. He's built teleportation devices. He devised 26 plans, from A to Z, in his attempts to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula, with only Plan Z achieving anything close to success. His laboratory in the chum bucket is filled with technology that would make actual real-world scientists jealous. The scope of his knowledge spans engineering, robotics, biology, chemistry, physics, and computer science. And yet, he fails, constantly, reliably, catastrophically. His plans are brilliant in conception and terrible in execution. He accounts for every variable except the ones that actually matter. He builds machines that work perfectly until SpongeBob walks into the room, and then everything falls apart. And the reason it falls apart isn't because SpongeBob outsmarts him. It's because Plankton can't account for randomness, for chaos, for the unpredictable behavior of someone who doesn't operate according to logic. I think this is maybe the most perceptive thing SpongeBob SquarePants ever did with a character. Plankton is a textbook example of the difference between intelligence and wisdom. He might be the most intelligent character in the show in terms of raw cognitive ability. His knowledge base is extraordinary. His technical skills are unmatched. But he has absolutely no wisdom. He doesn't understand people. He doesn't understand emotions. He doesn't understand that the Krabby Patty isn't just a formula. It's an experience, a feeling, a connection between the people who make it and the people who eat it. And that's why he'll never replicate it. Not because he's not smart enough to figure out the ingredients, but because the secret ingredient isn't an ingredient at all. It's love. It's care. It's SpongeBob waking up every morning genuinely excited to flip patties for people he's never met. In The Algae's Always Greener, the Season 3 premiere, which aired on March 22nd, 2002, Plankton uses a device to switch lives with Mr. Krabs. And for a brief moment, he has everything he wanted. The restaurant, the formula, the success, and he's miserable. Because running a business requires dealing with people, and dealing with people requires emotional intelligence that Plankton simply doesn't have. The stress of managing SpongeBob, of dealing with customers, of handling the day-to-day chaos of restaurant work overwhelms him so completely that he voluntarily goes back to his old life. The smartest character in the show chooses to fail because success requires skills he doesn't possess. And the friend or foe backstory adds another layer. Plankton was a nerd as a kid. He was viewed as a nerd for his intelligence, ridiculed by his peers. His friendship with Mr. Krabs was built on mutual outsider status. Krabs was too poor. Plankton was too smart. And they found each other in that shared rejection. But when the Krabby Patty recipe happened, when success entered the picture, Plankton's intelligence became the thing that drove them apart. He wanted to analyze the formula, to understand it scientifically, to reduce it to its components. And Krabs just wanted to sell burgers. That fundamental difference, the scientific mind versus the commercial mind, defined both of their lives. In Plankton's Army, from Season 3, which aired on January 19, 2004, Plankton recruits his entire extended family for a heist on the Krusty Krab. And when his hillbilly cousins show up, he's horrified. Not because the plan failed, but because he realizes that intelligence isn't genetic, that his brilliance exists in isolation, surrounded by relatives who couldn't plan their way out of a paper bag. There's something deeply lonely about that scene, and I don't think you catch it as a kid. You catch it on a rewatch at 2 in the morning when you're thinking about your own place in your own family. And then there's the Plankton's Regular episode from Season 6, which aired on August 6th, 2008. And I think this is one of the most quietly devastating episodes the show ever produced in terms of what it says about Plankton's intelligence. In this episode, Plankton discovers he has a regular customer. One person. One single person in all of Bikini Bottom who chooses to eat at the chum bucket. And Plankton is so overjoyed, so completely transformed by this one small validation that he starts gloating to Mr. Krabs. He parades this customer around. He celebrates. For the first time in the entire series, someone chose his restaurant willingly. And then Karen reveals the truth. She paid the customer to eat the chum. The regular was a lie. Karen manufactured the entire thing because she was tired of Plankton's complaining. And here's what gets me about that episode. Karen, the most intelligent character in the show, used her intelligence to give her husband a moment of happiness. She didn't build a weapon, or hack a system, or devise a scheme. She just paid a guy to eat at the chum bucket because it would make Plankton smile. That's intelligence in service of love. And it's beautiful, and it's sad, and it's the kind of thing this show does that you don't find anywhere else. But it also reveals something about Plankton's intelligence that I think is crucial. He didn't question it. The most scientifically rigorous mind in Bikini Bottom, the man who has built sentient computers and mind control helmets and dimensional transporters, did not once think to ask why someone was suddenly eating at his restaurant. Because he wanted it to be true. He needed it to be true. His emotional need overwhelmed his analytical capacity. And I think that's the most realistic thing SpongeBob SquarePants ever did with a genius character. Because in the real world, that's exactly how smart people fail. Not because they can't see the truth. Because they don't want to. This is one of those episodes I think about randomly at like 2 in the morning. The idea that Karen loves Plankton enough to construct an elaborate lie just to give him one good day. The idea that Plankton's intelligence collapses when it encounters something he desperately wants to believe. There's more emotional truth in that 11-minute episode than in most hour-long dramas. But I actually have a theory about this that I've never heard anyone else bring up. I think the show deliberately makes Plankton fail not because he's too smart to succeed, but because his intelligence is disconnected from joy. Look at the characters who succeed in SpongeBob. SpongeBob succeeds because he loves his work. Mr. Krabs succeeds because he loves money. Sandy succeeds because she loves science. Plankton fails because he doesn't love anything except winning. The formula isn't the goal. Beating Krabs is the goal. And that's why his intelligence, which is enormous, which is real, which should theoretically make him the most successful person in Bikini Bottom, never produces results. He's brilliant. He's just not happy. And in SpongeBob's universe, happiness is the secret formula for everything. And I want to make one more point about Plankton before I move on, because I think it connects to something larger about how the show views intelligence in relation to scale. Plankton is tiny. He's microscopic in a world of regular-sized fish. And his intelligence, his enormous world-class intelligence, exists inside a body that the world doesn't take seriously. Mr. Krabs can flick him away. SpongeBob can step on him accidentally. He's physically insignificant. And I think there's something the show is saying about how intelligence without power, without physical presence, without the ability to be taken seriously by the world around you, is a particular kind of prison. Because Plankton doesn't just want the formula. He wants to matter. He wants Bikini Bottom to look at him and see someone worth fearing, someone worth respecting, someone whose intelligence deserves acknowledgement. And every plan, every invention, every scheme is ultimately an attempt to make the world see what he already knows about himself. That he's brilliant, that he deserves more than the chum bucket, that his mind is bigger than his body. And the tragedy, the real tragedy of Plankton, is that he's right. His intelligence does deserve recognition. His inventions are extraordinary. His mind is remarkable. But the way he pursues that recognition, through theft and conquest and domination, ensures that he'll never get it. Not really. Not in any way that satisfies the ache. Karen sees it. Karen knows. And I think that's why she stays. Not because she doesn't have options. A sentient supercomputer could go anywhere, do anything. She stays because she knows what Plankton needs. And she knows he'll never figure out how to get it on his own. That's not just intelligence. That's grace. Speaking of Sandy, let's talk about Sandra Jennifer Sandy Cheeks. Sandy is, in my opinion, the most consistently intelligent character who isn't a computer in the entire SpongeBob SquarePants universe. Voiced by Carolyn Lawrence, since the beginning, Sandy is a squirrel from Texas who lives at the bottom of the ocean in a pressurized, air-filled tree dome. And just that fact alone, just the fact of her living situation, tells you something about the level of engineering genius we're dealing with. She built and maintains a self-sustaining underwater habitat. She designed and constructed her own airsuit. She adapted her entire life to an environment that should be completely hostile to her physiology. And she did all of this because she wanted to study the ocean's creatures. Sandy originally came to Bikini Bottom to study sea creatures and their lifestyles while working for a group of chimpanzee scientists at an organization called BOOTS. In Chimps Ahoy from Season 4, which aired on May 5th, 2006, her employers visit to inspect her inventions, and if they're not impressed, she has to leave Bikini Bottom forever. That episode reveals the institutional framework around Sandy's work. She's not a hobbyist. She's a professional scientist on assignment. She has bosses, funding, performance reviews. She's an employee of a scientific research organization conducting fieldwork in an extreme environment. That's not just smart, that's brilliant. Her list of inventions is genuinely staggering when you compile it. A teleporter, a nut communication device, a food-to-stomach transporter, a rocket ship, which we see in Sandy's rocket from Season 1, which aired on September 17th, 1999. She built an actual rocket in her backyard under the ocean. SpongeBob and Patrick sneaked aboard, accidentally launched it, flew around the moon, and came back. And Sandy's reaction wasn't surprise that the rocket worked. It was annoyance that they took it without asking. Because of course the rocket works. She built it. Everything she builds works. I should mention pre-hibernation week here too, because I think it shows another side of Sandy's intelligence that doesn't get talked about. In that Season 2 episode, Sandy drags SpongeBob through an insane series of extreme sports and dangerous activities before she goes into hibernation for the winter. She's so intense, so relentless, so completely committed to maximizing every remaining day of consciousness that SpongeBob literally hides from her. The entire town hides from her. And what that episode reveals is that Sandy's intelligence isn't just academic, it's obsessive. She doesn't do anything halfway. When she commits to something, whether it's science or karate, or squeezing every drop of experience out of the time she has left before she sleeps for months, she commits totally. And that intensity, that all or nothing quality, is something I think a lot of genuinely intelligent people recognize in themselves. The inability to be casual about anything. The need to push every activity to its absolute limit. Sandy doesn't just participate in life. She attacks it. And her intelligence is the engine that drives that attack. There's also something really interesting about how Sandy's intelligence interacts with the fact that she's literally a foreigner in Bikini Bottom. She's from Texas. She's a land animal. She breathes air. Everything about her is different from everyone around her. And her intelligence is what allows her to bridge that gap, to build the technology she needs to survive, to communicate across species barriers, to form friendships with creatures who are fundamentally different from her in every biological way. Sandy's intelligence isn't just about what she knows. It's about what it enables. It enables belonging. It enables connection. It enables a squirrel to live at the bottom of the ocean and call it home. And here's what I love about how the show handles Sandy's intelligence. It's never played as a character flaw. With Plankton, intelligence is isolating and self-defeating. With Squidward, intelligence is performative and insecure. With Mr. Krabs, intelligence is narrow and corrupting. But with Sandy, intelligence is just good. It's straightforward. It's positive. She uses her smarts to help her friends, to solve problems, to explore the world, and to karate chop things when she feels like it. Her intelligence doesn't come at a cost. It doesn't have a dark side. It just is. I've rewatched the early Sandy episodes probably 10 times putting this together, and the thing that hits different every time is how casually the show presents her genius. She doesn't announce it. She doesn't brag about it. She just does things that are extraordinary, and everyone around her treats it as normal. Oh, Sandy built a teleporter? Cool. Sandy figured out the molecular structure of something? Great. Sandy's doing karate while also solving a physics equation? Sure, that's Wednesday. In Texas, from Season 1, which aired on March 22nd, 2000, we get to see the emotional side of Sandy's intelligence for the first time. She gets homesick. She misses Texas. And her response isn't to logic her way out of the feeling. She sings. She writes a song about Texas. It's beautiful and sad and genuine, and it reminds you that Sandy's intelligence doesn't protect her from loneliness. She left her entire world to study the ocean. She lives alone in a dome surrounded by water she can't breathe. She's the only air-breathing mammal in a city of fish. And her intelligence, which is what brought her there, is also what makes her aware of how alone she is. There's something about that combination, the brilliant scientist who also gets homesick, who also does karate, who also has a thick Texas accent, who also arm wrestles and eats nuts and sleeps through winter, that makes Sandy feel like the most complete character in the show. She's not defined by one thing. Her intelligence is just one part of her. And I think that's actually the show's commentary on what real intelligence looks like. It's not all-consuming. It doesn't replace your personality. It exists alongside everything else, alongside your emotions, your relationships, your weaknesses, your joys. Sandy is smart, and she's also everything else. And I think that's why she's the most underrated character in the entire franchise. And look, I need to address something that I think is really important about how we talk about Sandy's intelligence. Because there's a pattern in SpongeBob fan discussions that I find frustrating. People will rank the smartest characters and put Plankton at the top, or Karen at the top, or sometimes even Squidward above Sandy. And I think that reveals a bias in how we think about intelligence that the show itself pushes back against. Plankton is smart, sure. He builds things. He schemes. He has flashy technology and dramatic plans. His intelligence is loud. It's visible. It demands attention. Sandy's intelligence is quieter. It's practical. It gets results. She doesn't monologue about her inventions. She just uses them. She doesn't announce her genius. She just demonstrates it, again and again, in ways that actually improve people's lives. And I think the fact that fans consistently underrate Sandy relative to Plankton says something about how we value theatrical intelligence over functional intelligence. Plankton's intelligence makes great TV. Sandy's intelligence makes the world better. And somehow, we're more impressed by the one that makes great TV. The thing about Sandy that I don't think people fully appreciate is the sheer breadth of her knowledge. She's not just a scientist in one field. She understands biology, chemistry, physics, engineering, computer science, and environmental science. She can build machines, analyze data, fight off villains, and perform surgery on a sea creature she's never encountered before. In perfect chemistry, she works alongside Plankton in a lab setting, and she more than holds her own. She's his intellectual equal in virtually every scientific discipline, and in some, she might be his superior. The difference is that Sandy uses her intelligence constructively, while Plankton uses his destructively. And I think that distinction matters for how we should rank them. I've actually spent an embarrassing amount of time going through Sandy's episode list, trying to catalog every invention she's ever built. And the list is ridiculous. It's like if Tony Stark lived under the ocean and also did karate. The scale of what she's accomplished, essentially as a solo researcher working out of a pressurized dome with limited resources, is extraordinary. And the show treats all of it as completely normal. That's Sandy. She builds rockets. She invents teleporters. She goes back to karate. Now here's my theory about why Sandy often gets ranked lower than she should. It's not because fans don't like her. It's because the show, especially in the later seasons, didn't know what to do with her. In the first 3 seasons, the Hillenburg era, Sandy is a fully realized character with her own stories, her own arcs, her own reasons for existing. But as the show continued after Hillenburg stepped back following the SpongeBob SquarePants movie in 2004, Sandy's role gradually shrank. She became the smart friend who shows up to explain things or fix problems, rather than a character who drives stories on her own. Her intelligence went from being part of a rich, 3-dimensional character to being her only defining trait. And that's not Sandy's fault. That's the show losing sight of what made her special. Alright, we're at the top of the list now. And I need to talk about Karen. Karen Plankton, the waterproof supercomputer. Plankton's wife, the smartest resident of Bikini Bottom. And it's not particularly close. Karen, voiced by Jill Talley, who in a beautiful piece of real-world symmetry is the wife of Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, first appeared alongside Plankton in Plankton back in Season 1. But it wasn't until The Algae's Always Greener, the Season 3 premiere, that the show revealed she and Plankton were actually married. And from that point on, Karen evolved from a simple laboratory computer into one of the most fascinating characters in the entire series. Here's why Karen is at the top. She's not just intelligent. She's the most comprehensive intelligence in Bikini Bottom.
Every other character on this list has gaps. SpongeBob is selectively smart. Plankton is brilliant, but unwise. Sandy is a genius, but specialized in science and engineering. Squidward has knowledge without self-awareness. Mr. Krabs has business acumen without emotional intelligence. But Karen? Karen has it all. She has raw computational power that exceeds anything else in the show. She can analyze virtually anything. She has emotional intelligence, regularly reading Plankton's moods and motivations better than he can himself. She has social awareness. She understands the dynamics of Bikini Bottom better than her husband, often pointing out the flaws in his plans before he executes them. She has creative problem-solving ability. Most of Plankton's effective plans have come from Karen, including Plan Z, the only scheme that actually resulted in Plankton successfully stealing the formula in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. And here's what's wild about that. Karen is the architect of the one plan that actually worked. Plan Z, the scheme that succeeded in stealing the Krabby Patty formula and allowed Plankton to use it to take over Bikini Bottom. The closest Plankton ever came to his lifelong dream was because of his wife's intelligence, not his own. And the show is very specific about this. Karen doesn't get the credit. Plankton doesn't acknowledge it. But the audience knows. Karen is the brains of the chum bucket. She always has been. What makes Karen even more impressive is her emotional range. She's not just a cold, calculating machine. She gets frustrated. She gets sarcastic. She gets genuinely hurt when Plankton ignores her or dismisses her input. She has opinions about their relationship, about their life, about the futility of Plankton's obsession with the formula. In some of the best Karen episodes, she essentially becomes the voice of reason that Plankton is too stubborn to listen to. She tells him his plans won't work. She tells him why they won't work. She gives him better alternatives. And he ignores her. Every single time. I think there's something really poignant about that. The smartest character in the show is consistently ignored by the person closest to her. Karen's intelligence is real, proven, and comprehensive. And it doesn't matter, because the person who should value it most treats it as background noise. And the fact that she stays, the fact that she keeps helping, keeps planning, keeps caring about this tiny green organism who built her from a calculator, says something about Karen that goes beyond intelligence. It says something about loyalty, about love, about choosing to be with someone even when you know, mathematically, empirically, with complete certainty, that their plans are going to fail. I need to spend some time on Welcome to the Chum Bucket, because I think that Season 2 episode, which aired on January 21st, 2002, reveals something crucial about the relationship between intelligence and environment that affects how we should think about this whole ranking. In this episode, Mr. Krabs loses SpongeBob to Plankton in a game of cards. SpongeBob has to go work at the Chum Bucket, and Plankton, the genius, the inventor, the man who built a sentient AI from spare parts, cannot get SpongeBob to cook a single Krabby Patty. Think about what that means. Plankton has the formula. He has SpongeBob, the only person who can actually make the patties sing. He has every piece of the puzzle, and it still doesn't work, because SpongeBob is miserable. He misses the Krusty Krab. He misses the environment, the greasy walls, the cheap tables, the sound of the cash register. And without that emotional connection, his cooking intelligence just shuts down. Plankton tries everything. He rebuilds the Chum Bucket kitchen to look exactly like the Krusty Krab. He even tries putting SpongeBob's brain in a robot, figuring he can separate the skill from the emotion. And the robot just becomes SpongeBob. Same personality, same emotional needs, same inability to function outside the environment it loves. That episode is Plankton learning, in real time, the limitation of his own intelligence. He can replicate the physical components of success. He can build the machines, steal the formulas, kidnap the employees. But he cannot replicate the feeling. He cannot engineer joy. And without joy, the intelligence is useless. The formula is worthless. The whole enterprise collapses. Karen could have told him this. Karen probably did tell him this. He didn't listen. And here's where I want to draw a connection to something broader, because I think this applies to more characters than just Plankton. In Graveyard Shift, the Season 2 episode that aired on September 6th, 2002, Squidward and SpongeBob work the night shift at the Krusty Krab, and Squidward, bored out of his mind, invents the story of the hash-slinging slasher. A former fry cook who cut off his own hand
replaced it with a rusty spatula, got hit by a bus, and was fired at his own funeral. It's a ridiculous story. It's Squidward using his intelligence, his creativity, his knowledge of horror tropes to mess with SpongeBob. And it works. SpongeBob is terrified. But then the things Squidward described start actually happening. The lights flicker. The phone rings with nobody on the other end. A figure appears. And suddenly, Squidward is terrified too. His intelligence, which built the story, can't protect him from the fear the story created. He becomes a victim of his own cleverness. And the punchline, the reveal that it was just a nervous kid applying for a job and Nosferatu messing with the light switch, is the show's way of saying that intelligence can build monsters, but can't always defeat them. Squidward is smart enough to scare himself and not smart enough to talk himself down. And honestly, Graveyard Shift might be the best Squidward intelligence episode the show ever produced, because it shows both the power and the fragility of his particular kind of smart. He's creative enough to build an entire mythology from nothing. The hash-slinging slasher, a former fry cook who cut off his own hand, replaced it with a rusty spatula, was hit by a bus, and got fired at his own funeral. That's a genuinely impressive piece of improvisational storytelling. Squidward invents a horror villain on the spot, complete with backstory, harbingers, and a catchphrase. His narrative intelligence, his ability to construct and deliver a story, is real and significant. But his emotional intelligence, his ability to manage his own fear once the story starts coming true, is non-existent. He scares himself as badly as he scares SpongeBob. He becomes a prisoner of his own creation. And there's something almost mythological about that. The artist destroyed by his own art. The storyteller trapped in his own story. Squidward's intelligence is Promethean in the most literal sense. It gives him fire, and then the fire burns him. That's a pattern you see over and over with Squidward. His intelligence creates problems as often as it solves them. He's smart enough to be condescending to SpongeBob, but not smart enough to realize that SpongeBob is happier than he is. He's smart enough to know what good music sounds like, but not smart enough to accept that he can't always make it. He's smart enough to understand art, but not smart enough to stop comparing himself to artists who are better. His intelligence is like a flashlight that only points outward. He can see everything around him with perfect clarity, but he can't turn it on himself. Karen was named after Karen Hillenburg, Stephen Hillenburg's wife, and I think that naming choice says everything about how Hillenburg viewed this character. She's not a villain's accessory. She's not a plot device. She's a person, even if she's made of circuits and screens, and her intelligence, the most powerful intelligence in the show, is grounded in something fundamentally human. From season 10 onward, Karen always appears in her mobile form rather than as the large computer screen in the Chum Bucket laboratory. And as of season 12, her mobile form almost always has arms. And I think those design changes are meaningful. They're making her more physical, more present, more like a person, and less like a machine. The show is gradually acknowledging what has always been true. Karen isn't a computer that happens to have a personality. She's a person who happens to be made of technology. And her intelligence isn't what makes her interesting. Her intelligence is just the most obvious thing about a character who is so much more than her processing power. Okay, I know I said I was ranking these characters, and I have been, but I want to take a moment to zoom out and talk about something bigger. Because I think the way SpongeBob SquarePants handles intelligence across its entire cast is one of the most sophisticated things any animated show has ever done. And I want to make sure that idea doesn't get lost in the individual rankings. Stephen Hillenburg, the marine science educator turned animator who created this show, built a world where intelligence is never one thing. It's never a single scale. In Bikini Bottom, there are dozens of kinds of smart. SpongeBob is emotionally brilliant. Patrick is instinctively wise. Squidward is culturally knowledgeable. Mr. Krabs is financially shrewd. Plankton is technically gifted. Sandy is scientifically rigorous. Karen is comprehensively analytical. Gary is secretly erudite. Mrs. Puff is strategically adaptive. Even Larry, who I ranked at the bottom, has a kind of physical intelligence that nobody else in the show can match. And the show's thesis, the thing it keeps saying over and over across hundreds of episodes and 3 movies and multiple spin-offs, is that none of these kinds of intelligence is inherently better than any other. SpongeBob's emotional intelligence saves the day, just as often as Sandy's scientific genius. Mr. Krabs' business acumen is presented as both a strength and a moral failing. Plankton's technical brilliance is shown to be both awe-inspiring and completely self-defeating. The show refuses to create a simple hierarchy. Every kind of smart has a cost and a benefit, and the characters who thrive are the ones whose intelligence is connected to joy. I keep coming back to that idea, joy, because I think that's the secret formula of SpongeBob SquarePants itself. Not the Krabby Patty formula, the show's formula, the thing that makes it work. Intelligence in SpongeBob is never just about what you know. It's about what you do with what you know. And the characters who do the best are the ones who use their intelligence to create happiness. SpongeBob uses his cooking skills to make people smile. Sandy uses her inventions to explore and discover. Karen uses her analysis to support someone she loves. And the characters who suffer are the ones who use their intelligence for other purposes. Plankton uses his for conquest. Krabs uses his for accumulation. Squidward uses his for superiority. Same cognitive capacity, completely different outcomes. Look, I've watched SpongeBob more times than I can count, and this might be the thing that impresses me the most about the show. Not the comedy, which is extraordinary. Not the animation, which is beautiful. Not the voice performances, which are iconic. The thing that impresses me most is the philosophical sophistication hiding underneath all of it. This is a show about a sponge that fries burgers, and it has more to say about the nature of intelligence than most shows that are explicitly trying to be smart. That's an achievement. That's a genuine, lasting, meaningful achievement, and I think Steven Hillenburg deserves credit for it every single day. I want to go back and spend some time on a few characters I haven't given enough attention to yet, because I think there are some intelligence dynamics in SpongeBob that are really fascinating once you start pulling at them. But first, can we talk about something that I think is genuinely underappreciated? The way the show handles intelligence across different eras. Because SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air since May 1st, 1999, and the way it depicts intelligence has changed dramatically over time. And I think understanding those changes tells you a lot about what happens when a show's creative vision shifts. In the Hillenburg era, seasons 1 through 3, intelligence is nuanced. Every character has multiple dimensions. SpongeBob is naive, but emotionally brilliant. Squidward is knowledgeable, but self-defeating. Patrick is dumb, but occasionally wise. The show respects all of its characters, even the ones it's laughing at. Nobody is just one thing. Nobody is reduced to a single trait. Then the first movie comes out in 2004, the one Hillenburg intended as the series finale, and everything changes. Hillenburg steps back. Paul Tibbitt takes over as showrunner, and gradually, the intelligence of the characters starts to flatten. SpongeBob gets dumber. Patrick gets dumber. Squidward's suffering increases without the emotional payoff. Mr. Krabs becomes more purely greedy. Plankton becomes more purely villainous. The nuance starts to drain out. And I'm not saying the later seasons are all bad. They're not. There are genuinely great episodes after season 3. But in terms of how the show handles intelligence, there's a visible shift towards simplification. Characters become more what they are, and less everything else. SpongeBob's selective intelligence, his fascinating combination of brilliance and obliviousness, gets flattened into just obliviousness. Patrick's accidental wisdom disappears in favor of pure stupidity, and sometimes a meaner kind of stupidity that the early seasons never would have given him. Squidward's genuine talent gets overshadowed by his suffering. And I think this matters for our ranking, because it means that when I talk about these characters' intelligence, I'm primarily talking about the Hillenburg era versions. The versions that were written with the most care, the most nuance, and the most respect for what intelligence actually looks like in all its complicated, contradictory forms. Because in those first 3 seasons, plus the first movie, every character in this show was operating at the peak of their own specific kind of intelligence. And that's the version that earned SpongeBob its place in the cultural conversation. When Hillenburg returned to the show around season 9B, after years away, and before his ALS diagnosis in 2017 and his passing on November 26, 2018, you can actually see the nuance starting to come back. The characters regain some of their depth. Sandy becomes more than just the smart friend again. Squidward's suffering carries more weight. Patrick's stupidity is tempered with the occasional flash of something deeper. It's like the show remembered what it was supposed to be. The thing about SpongeBob is that it rewards rewatching in a way that almost no other animated show does. Every single time, you catch a visual gag or a background detail you missed. And when it comes to intelligence, the rewatches reveal layers that you absolutely do not see the first time around. Patrick's lines hit different when you're looking for the wisdom in them. Squidward's frustration hits different when you recognize the intelligence trapped underneath it. Even Larry makes more sense when you stop expecting him to be something he's not. I also want to bring up something about the Krusty Krab training video episode that I think is deeply relevant to our intelligence rankings, and it's something most people don't notice on first viewing. This Season 3 episode, which aired on May 10th, 2002, is structured entirely as an industrial training film for new Krusty Krab employees, and the narrator of that training video, voiced by Steve Kahila, walks SpongeBob through the history of the restaurant, the expectations of the job, and the process of making a Krabby Patty. And throughout the entire episode, SpongeBob already knows everything. He doesn't need the training. He intuits every step before the video explains it. He's already performing at a level that the training video can't teach. And then comes the ending. The narrator is about to reveal the secret formula. The moment the entire episode has been building toward, and the video just cuts off. It ends. We never hear the formula, and the show does this deliberately, not just as a comedy bit, but because I think it's making a point about the limits of institutional knowledge. You can train someone. You can give them a manual. You can walk them through every step. But the thing that actually makes the Krabby Patty special, the thing that SpongeBob brings to it, can't be put in a training video. It can't be systematized. It can't be reduced to a formula. It's love. It's joy. It's the ineffable quality that a person who genuinely cares brings to their work. And no amount of training, no amount of intelligence, no amount of procedure can replicate that. That's why Plankton will never win. Not because he can't figure out the ingredients, because the secret ingredient isn't in the patty, it's in the cook. Let's talk about the Flying Dutchman for a minute, because the Flying Dutchman is a character whose intelligence rarely comes up in these conversations. And I think that's a mistake. He's a ghost, an immortal, supernatural ghost pirate who has been terrorizing the ocean for centuries. And while the show mostly uses him for horror comedy episodes, there's something interesting about the kind of intelligence he represents. The Flying Dutchman understands manipulation. He understands fear. He understands how to read a situation and exploit it for his own benefit. When he appears in episodes, he consistently outsmarts the main characters, at least initially, through a combination of supernatural power and psychological insight. He knows what scares people. He knows what they want, and he uses that knowledge to get what he wants, whether it's souls, respect, or just entertainment. But the Flying Dutchman also demonstrates a kind of laziness about his intelligence that I find really interesting. He's smart enough to scare everyone, but he's not smart enough to adapt when someone doesn't scare easily. SpongeBob is essentially immune to his tactics because SpongeBob doesn't process fear the way normal characters do. And the Dutchman's inability to deal with that, his frustration when his usual approach doesn't work, reveals the limits of a very specific kind of intelligence. Street smarts, manipulation, reading the room. All valuable, all limited. Now let me circle back to something that connects several of the characters we've discussed, because there's a thread running through SpongeBob's intelligence system that I think is really important. The show uses pairs to highlight different kinds of intelligence. SpongeBob and Squidward, Plankton and Mr. Krabs, Sandy and Patrick, Karen and Plankton. Each pair is designed to contrast two different approaches to understanding the world, and the show builds its comedy and its heart out of those contrasts. SpongeBob and Squidward are probably the most important pairing. SpongeBob is everything Squidward isn't. Emotionally intelligent, socially connected, professionally fulfilled, personally content. And Squidward is everything SpongeBob isn't. Culturally educated, artistically trained, socially aware, critically minded. They live next to each other. They work at the same restaurant. They share almost everything in their daily lives. And they couldn't be more different in how they process the world. SpongeBob sees beauty everywhere. Squidward sees ugliness. SpongeBob finds joy in repetition. Squidward finds misery. SpongeBob loves his life. Squidward hates his. And the show asks, who's actually smarter? The person who understands the world and is miserable, or the person who doesn't understand the world and is happy? And I don't think it gives us a clear answer. I think it gives us something better than an answer. It gives us the question, and it lets us sit with it. You can see this dynamic play out most clearly in the episodes where SpongeBob tries to make Squidward happy, because SpongeBob's emotional intelligence tells him, correctly, that Squidward is suffering. And SpongeBob's response is always the same. He tries to share his joy. He invites Squidward to jellyfishing. He visits Squidward's house. He inserts himself into Squidward's life with the pure, uncomplicated belief that friendship and fun can fix anything. And Squidward's cultural intelligence tells him, correctly, that SpongeBob's approach is childish and simplistic and beneath him. They're both right, and they're both wrong. SpongeBob is right that Squidward needs connection. Squidward is right that SpongeBob's specific form of connection doesn't work for him. And the show lives in that tension, in that impossible space between two kinds of intelligence that can see each other clearly but can't bridge the gap between them. If you're still listening at this point, if you haven't fallen asleep yet, I want to acknowledge something. This video has been about a lot more than just ranking cartoon characters, because you can't rank intelligence without defining it, and you can't define it without revealing your own assumptions about what matters. Every ranking I've given tonight is, in some way, a statement about my own values. I put emotional intelligence above cultural knowledge. I put practical application above raw capacity. I put joy above conquest. And someone else, watching this same show, could rank these exact same characters in a completely different order, based on completely different values, and be just as right as I am. That's the magic of what Hillenburg built. A cast so rich that they support infinite interpretations. The Plankton and Mr. Krabs pairing works on a similar dynamic, but with a different axis. Plankton is intellectually brilliant. Krabs is practically brilliant. Plankton understands science. Krabs understands people, or at least he understands what people will pay for. Plankton's genius produces inventions that should conquer the world. Krabs' shrewdness produces a restaurant that actually does. And the show keeps putting them against each other. These two childhood friends turned enemies. These two very different kinds of smart. And showing us that neither one alone is sufficient. Plankton has the brains, but not the heart. Krabs has the instinct, but not the soul. Together, as kids, they had something complete. Apart, they're each half a person, brilliant in their own domain, and completely broken in every other way. And the Sandy-Patrick pairing is one I don't think people talk about enough. Sandy is, by any measure, the most practically intelligent organic character in the show. Patrick is, by most measures, the least. And yet, they're friends. They hang out. They enjoy each other's company. In Survival of the Idiots, Sandy is hibernating, and SpongeBob and Patrick are the idiots of the title. But the premise only works because Sandy trusted them enough to let them near her tree dome. She knows they're going to mess things up. She knows they don't understand hibernation, and she lets them be around anyway. Because friendship in Bikini Bottom isn't based on intellectual compatibility. It's based on something simpler and more important than that. There's a lesson there, hidden underneath the comedy, that I think is actually really beautiful. The smartest person in the room doesn't have to only hang out with other smart people. Intelligence isn't a social sorting mechanism. You can be a rocket scientist and still find genuine joy in spending time with a guy who lives under a rock. And I think Hillenburg, who was himself a very intelligent person, a marine biologist, and a CalArts graduate, and the creator of a billion-dollar franchise, understood that from personal experience. The smartest people aren't the ones who surround themselves with other smart people. They're the ones who can find connection everywhere. You know what's funny? I've spent more time thinking about the intelligence dynamics in SpongeBob SquarePants than I spent thinking about intelligence in most shows that are actually about intelligence. This cartoon about a sea sponge has a more nuanced theory of mind than most prestige dramas. And I think that's because Hillenburg wasn't trying to make a show about intelligence. He was trying to make a show about life. And intelligence, in all its forms, in all its failures, in all its beauty, is just part of life. I want to spend some time now talking about something that I think connects the intelligence rankings to the show's larger themes. And that's the question of what intelligence is for. In the real world, we tend to think of intelligence as an end in itself. Smart people are better. More intelligence is always preferable. Being the smartest person in the room is winning. And SpongeBob SquarePants, quietly, persistently, across hundreds of episodes, pushes back against every single one of those assumptions. Look at the smartest characters in the show. Karen is the most intelligent character in Bikini Bottom, and she spends her life helping a husband who doesn't listen to her. Sandy is the most accomplished scientist in the ocean, and she's happiest when she's doing karate or hanging out with SpongeBob. Plankton is a technological genius, and he's the most miserable character in the cast. Squidward has genuine cultural knowledge, and all it does is make him aware of what he's missing. Now look at the least intelligent characters. Patrick is, by any traditional measure, profoundly unintelligent, and he's happy. Larry is running on pure physical instinct, and he's content. SpongeBob is selectively smart at best, and he wakes up every single morning with the same impossible enthusiasm, thrilled to be alive, thrilled to go to work, thrilled to see his friends. After over 2 decades, he's still doing the exact same things and still finding joy in them. The show isn't saying intelligence is bad. That would be too simple. What it's saying is more nuanced and more interesting. It's saying intelligence is a tool, and like any tool, what matters isn't how powerful it is. What matters is what you build with it. SpongeBob builds happiness with his limited intelligence. Sandy builds discovery and friendship with her enormous intelligence. Karen builds love and partnership with her superior intelligence. But Plankton builds obsession with his. Squidward builds resentment. Mr. Krabs builds wealth at the expense of everything else. And honestly, I think that's one of the most profound things any children's show has ever communicated. Intelligence isn't a measure of worth. It's not a predictor of happiness. It's not an indicator of moral character. It's just a capacity, like strength or speed or creativity. And the value of that capacity depends entirely on what you choose to do with it. I want to bring this back to something concrete, because I think there's a scene in SpongeBob that says everything I'm trying to say better than I can say it. In Band Geeks, the Season 2 episode that aired on September 7th, 2001, and was awarded at the 2002 Golden Reel Awards for Best Sound Editing in Television Animation, Squidward assembles a marching band to perform at the Bubble Bowl. He does this because Squilliam Fancyson called him and challenged him, and Squidward's ego, his intelligence turned inward, his desperate need to prove that he's not a failure, won't let him say no. And the rehearsals are a disaster. Every kind of intelligence in Bikini Bottom shows up, and none of them can work together. SpongeBob's enthusiasm is there, but his discipline isn't. Patrick's physicality is there, but his attention span isn't. Sandy's competence is there, but the rest of the band can't keep up. Mr. Krabs won't invest in proper instruments. Plankton is probably scheming somewhere off screen. It's chaos. Pure, beautiful, Bikini Bottom chaos. And Squidward, the only person with actual musical knowledge, can't make it work. And then, at the performance, it works. It works because SpongeBob gives a speech that has nothing to do with music theory or performance technique or any kind of traditional intelligence. He just says, do this for Squidward. Do it because he's our friend. Do it because it matters to him. And everyone plays their hearts out. Not because they learned how. Not because they got smarter. Because they cared. Because in that moment, the collective emotional intelligence of the entire cast of SpongeBob SquarePants came together and produced something extraordinary. And Squidward gets his moment. For the first and maybe the only time in the series, he wins. He gets the respect he's been chasing. Squilliam faints. The crowd goes wild, and the show lets him have it. No punchline. No reversal. No cruel twist. Just Squidward. On stage. Finally getting the moment he's been pursuing for years. I need you to think about what just happened there. The show took every kind of intelligence it had been building for 2 seasons. Emotional, cultural, physical, scientific, financial, instinctual, and showed that none of them individually could produce this result. Only together. Only in combination. Only when motivated by something that has nothing to do with intelligence at all. That's the thesis. Right there. In an 11-minute episode about a marching band. That's the whole thesis of SpongeBob SquarePants. And if that's not the most quietly brilliant thing a Nickelodeon cartoon has ever done, I don't know what is. The fact that Steven Hillenburg embedded this idea into a show about a sea sponge, and that it works for 5-year-olds and for adults who are overthinking cartoons at 2 in the morning,
is the kind of creative achievement that I genuinely think doesn't get celebrated enough. This man took a marine biology teaching aid, turned it into one of the most beloved animated shows in history, and smuggled genuine philosophy into every single episode. A marine science educator who went to CalArts and came out the other side with one of the most original creative visions in the history of television. That story deserves its own video, and honestly, I might make one. Let me compile the final rankings, because I've been circling around these for a while, and I want to put them in order before we start winding down. And I want to be thorough about this, because I think the reasoning behind each placement matters as much as the placement itself. I also want to acknowledge a few characters I haven't spent as much time on as they deserve. Pearl Krabs, Perch Perkins, Fred the Fish, the background characters of Bikini Bottom, who collectively form a kind of intelligence of their own. The crowd intelligence of a city that keeps going to the Krusty Krab, keeps attending Squidward's concerts, keeps living their lives around these extraordinary characters without seeming to notice how extraordinary they are. There's something intelligent about that, something wise about a community that absorbs chaos and keeps functioning. But they're supporting players, and tonight is about the main cast. Starting from the bottom, Larry the Lobster, last place, maximum physical intelligence, minimum everything else. His brain is a protein shake, God bless him. Patrick Star, second to last, but with a huge asterisk. Because Patrick's instinctual wisdom, his occasional flashes of accidental profundity, and the evidence from Patrick Smartpants that he's choosing simplicity over brilliance means he's not as straightforward as most people think. He's the least traditionally intelligent of the main cast, but I think the show respects what he brings to the table more than any simple ranking can capture. Mermaid Man, low tier, but with the crucial caveat that his intelligence isn't naturally low. It's diminished. The erosion of a sharp mind is a very different thing from a mind that was never sharp to begin with. And the show, voiced so perfectly by Ernest Borgnine until his death in 2012, handles that with more care than it had to. SpongeBob SquarePants, middle of the pack, the ultimate specialist, genius-level emotional intelligence, genius-level culinary ability, genius-level creativity, catastrophically incapable of driving a boat or understanding deception. He's the hardest character to rank because he's operating at the extremes simultaneously. An IQ of infinity in some domains, and an IQ of nothing in others. Barnacle Boy, upper middle, more cognitively present than his partner, capable of strategic thinking, aware enough of his situation to rebel against it. A functioning adult intelligence in the body of an elderly superhero. Tim Conway brought such humanity to this character, and his awareness of his own circumstances puts him above the characters who operate primarily on instinct or emotion. Mrs. Puff, upper middle, smarter than people realize, runs a school, designs curricula, has criminal operational intelligence that includes identity changes and escape plans. Her intelligence is mostly expressed through survival and suffering, which makes it easy to overlook, but it's real and it's substantial. Squidward Tentacles, upper tier, genuinely knowledgeable across multiple cultural domains, capable of composing symphonies, teaching art, understanding complex artistic and musical concepts, undermined catastrophically by his own ego and lack of self-awareness. The smartest failure in Bikini Bottom. His intelligence would be extraordinary if it weren't constantly at war with itself. Mr. Krabs, upper tier, the most financially intelligent character in the show by a massive margin, has built and maintained a successful business empire for decades. His intelligence is so narrowly focused on money that it's essentially useless in any other context. But within that context, he's unmatched. He sees angles that nobody else sees. He exploits opportunities that nobody else recognizes. He just can't see anything that doesn't have a dollar sign attached to it. Gary the Snail, upper tier, the dark horse, the sleeper pick, the secret genius hiding in a snail's shell. The evidence from Sleepy Time, library cards, Chatterbox Gary, and dozens of smaller moments across the series paints a picture of a character whose intelligence is vast, cultured, and deliberately hidden from the world. He reads, he philosophizes, he understands. He just chooses to meow about it. Sheldon J. Plankton, near the top, probably the highest raw cognitive ability of any biological character in the show. Built a sentient AI from a calculator, created mind control technology, mastered multiple scientific disciplines. His intelligence is real, enormous,
and almost completely wasted because it's disconnected from joy, wisdom, and emotional understanding. The most brilliant failure in Bikini Bottom, and maybe in all of animation. Sandy Cheeks. Second place, the most consistently, practically, and productively intelligent biological character in SpongeBob SquarePants. Scientist, inventor, engineer, explorer. Built a self-sustaining underwater habitat. Built a rocket. Built a teleporter. Works for an actual research institution. And unlike every other genius in the show, her intelligence is integrated with a healthy emotional life, genuine friendships, and personal happiness. She's what intelligence looks like when it's connected to a whole person. Plankton, first place. The undisputed champion. The most comprehensive intelligence in all of Bikini Bottom. Raw computational power beyond anything else in the show. Emotional intelligence that regularly surpasses every organic character. Strategic thinking that produced the only successful plan in the history of the Krabby Patty formula wars. Social awareness, analytical capability, creative problem solving. And she's named after the creator's wife, which means Hillenburg saw in this character something so important, so central to the show's world, that he gave her the name of the person he loved most. And if you're wondering why I didn't rank Squilliam Fancyson, who is clearly intelligent and successful and wealthy and everything Squidward wishes he was, it's because I think Squilliam serves a different function. He's not a character whose intelligence the show is interested in exploring. He's a mirror. He exists to show Squidward what he could have been, what he thinks he should have been, what his intelligence told him he deserved to be. Squilliam is smart, sure. He succeeded where Squidward failed. But the show never digs into how, never shows us his process, never explores his mind the way it explores Squidward's. Because Squilliam's intelligence isn't the point. Squidward's reaction to it is the point. And that's a really smart choice by the writers, to create a character who is defined entirely by what he makes another character feel. And look, I know some people are going to argue with these rankings. That's the whole point. I want you to disagree. I want you to think, actually, Squidward should be higher. Or actually, Gary shouldn't count because his intelligence is only shown in dreams. That's what makes this topic so rich. Because SpongeBob SquarePants built a cast where every character's intelligence is debatable, where every ranking reveals your own assumptions about what intelligence actually means. If you think intelligence is book smarts, Karen and Sandy win by miles. If you think intelligence is practical problem solving, Mr. Krabs is your champion. If you think intelligence is emotional understanding, SpongeBob runs the table. If you think intelligence is about choosing happiness, Patrick might just be the smartest character in the show. And if you think intelligence is about the things you create and leave behind, then maybe, just maybe, Gary's sitting in that library in his dreams, reading books nobody knows he's read, understanding things nobody knows he understands, is the most intelligent of them all. And I want to say one more thing about the spin-offs, because I think they're relevant to the intelligence conversation. Camp Corral, the prequel series, and the Patrick Star Show, the variety show spin-off, both take these characters and flatten their intelligence in ways that I think prove my earlier point about how much Hillenburg's vision mattered. In Camp Corral, young versions of the characters interact at summer camp, and the nuanced intelligence dynamics of the original show are largely absent. Sandy is just the smart kid. Patrick is just the dumb kid. The complexity, the paradoxes, the fascinating contradictions that made these characters feel real get smoothed out into simpler archetypes. And the Patrick Star Show leans even harder into Patrick's stupidity as a gimmick, rather than exploring the accidental wisdom and emotional depth that the original show found in him. I'm not trying to be harsh about the spin-offs. They're doing their own thing. They have their own audience. But I think the contrast between how those shows handle intelligence and how the original first 3 seasons handle it is the clearest evidence for what Hillenburg brought to the table. He understood that intelligence is complicated, that characters are more than one thing, that the funniest, most lasting comedy comes from letting smart and dumb coexist in the same character at the same time. And when that understanding isn't present, when characters become simple instead of complex, you can feel the difference immediately. The laughs are still there, but the weight isn't. I need to tell you something about why this ranking matters to me, and it goes beyond the show itself. I started watching SpongeBob when I was a kid. Like a lot of people my age, it was just a show. It was the thing that was on TV. It was funny and colorful and weird, and I didn't think about it much beyond that. And then I grew up, and the show kept going, and I kept watching. Not every episode, not every season, but enough to know it was still there, still chugging along, still making SpongeBob laugh and Squidward suffer and Patrick be confused. I remember watching Band Geeks when it first aired in September 2001. I remember the Super Bowl halftime petition. I remember the memes, the mocking SpongeBob meme, the imagination rainbow meme, the I don't need it meme. The entire internet infrastructure of SpongeBob references that my generation uses to communicate with each other. SpongeBob isn't just a show. It's a language. It's a shared vocabulary. And the intelligence of that, the intelligence of creating something so visually and emotionally rich that it becomes the raw material for an entire generation's humor, is not something that happens by accident. And somewhere in my 20s, I went back and rewatched the first 3 seasons, the Hillenburg era, and it was like watching a completely different show, because now I could see what he was doing. I could see the layers. I could see the philosophy underneath the slapstick, the commentary underneath the comedy, the genuine emotional intelligence underneath the talking sea creatures. And I realized that this show, this cartoon about a sponge, had been teaching me things about intelligence, about happiness, about what actually matters in life. Since I was a kid, I just hadn't been listening. When Steven Hillenburg disclosed his ALS diagnosis to Variety magazine in March 2017, something shifted in how I watched the show. And when he passed away on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57, something shifted in how I thought about it. Because here was a man who was, by any measure, extraordinarily intelligent. Marine biologist, CalArts graduate, creator of one of the most successful animated franchises in history. And what did he do with that intelligence? He made a show about a sponge who is happy, not a sponge who conquers the world, not a sponge who proves he's smarter than everyone else, not a sponge who accumulates power or wealth or status, a sponge who wakes up every morning, goes to work, hangs out with his friends, plays with his pet snail, and is genuinely, deeply, unshakably happy. And I think about that a lot. I think about a man who had every kind of intelligence, scientific knowledge, artistic talent, creative vision, emotional depth, and who chose to use all of it to make a children's cartoon. Not because he couldn't do something more serious, because he understood that making something joyful is the most serious thing you can do. That reaching a child with a story about a sponge who loves his job is just as meaningful as writing a literary novel or directing a prestige drama. Maybe more meaningful, because the reach is wider, the impact is deeper, the legacy is longer. That was Hillenburg's thesis. That was the message he poured his intelligence into for 2 decades. That happiness is the highest achievement. That joy is the deepest intelligence. That the ability to find wonder in the mundane, to find love in the everyday, to find meaning in flipping a burger or blowing a bubble or catching a jellyfish is not a sign of a simple mind. It's a sign of a brilliant one. The Super Bowl 53 halftime show in February 2019, just months after Hillenburg's death, became one of the most controversial moments in recent pop culture history because of SpongeBob. Fans had gathered over 1 million signatures on a petition to play Sweet Victory, the song from Band Geeks, as a tribute to Hillenburg's legacy. And what they got instead was an 8-second clip before Travis Scott came on. And people were angry, genuinely, deeply angry. Not because of the song itself, because of what it represented, because SpongeBob had meant something to them, because Hillenburg's show had been the background music of their entire lives, and they wanted the world to acknowledge that. They wanted the biggest stage in American entertainment to say, this mattered. This sponge, this show, this man who made it, it mattered. And I think that anger, that depth of feeling about a cartoon sea sponge, is maybe the best evidence I can offer for SpongeBob's thesis about intelligence. Because millions of people didn't just watch this show. They felt it. They absorbed it. They carried it with them into adulthood and found that it still meant something. And the intelligence required to create something that works on that level, that reaches a 5-year-old and a 30-year-old and a 50-year-old with equal force, that makes them all feel understood and entertained and seen. That might be the rarest kind of intelligence there is. The franchise has generated over $16 billion in merchandising revenue, and in 2025, it became the longest-running American children's animated series. Those are numbers, but the numbers don't capture what the show actually did, what it actually meant, what it still means. I've been talking for a long time now, and if you're still here, if you've been lying in bed or on the couch or wherever you are, listening to me rank cartoon characters by intelligence for the better part of an hour, I want you to know that I appreciate it. Genuinely. This is the kind of video that I make because I love making it. And knowing that someone out there is listening, whether you're wide awake or half asleep or somewhere in between, that's the thing that makes it worth it. Here's what I keep coming back to every time I finish a video like this. Every time I close the research tabs and turn off the episode I was rewatching and sit with the quiet that follows. SpongeBob SquarePants taught me that intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about what you do with whatever you've got. Patrick has almost nothing in the traditional sense, and he uses it to be the most loyal friend in the ocean. SpongeBob has a weird, specialized, lopsided kind of brilliance, and he uses it to spread joy to everyone around him. Sandy has real, formidable, world-class genius, and she uses it to explore and discover and help the people she loves. And Karen has the most powerful mind in Bikini Bottom, and she uses it to support a tiny green man who almost never listens to her, because she loves him, and love, in the end, is the most intelligent thing any of us ever do. And if that's the last thought you carry into sleep tonight, I think that's a pretty good one. Thank you for spending this time with me. I mean that. These videos are long, and they ask a lot of you, and the fact that you show up for them means more than I can say. If you enjoyed this, subscribing really does help us keep making these for you, and if you can't sleep, well, that's what the next video is for. Good night, everybody. Good night, everyone. Sleep well.